Good morning. My name is Louis Tigera. I'm the police chief for the Niles Police Department. Today we are here to provide you a factual synopsis of the last 6 months regarding several internal investigations. Sergeant Boba, commanding officer in charge of the Detective Bureau, will brief you on these investigations. After Sergeant Boba is done, I will do a recap, then open up for a couple of questions. But first, I'm proud to stand here today knowing that we as a department did everything that the 21st century policing requires, everything that lawmakers, community leaders, and most importantly, the people expects us to do. We were made aware of an alleged cover-up for a call for service on February 28th, 2021. We followed it. We conducted a thorough, exhaustive, and unbiased investigation. The evidence revealed no merit in the assertion that there was an effort by the NPD officers to cover the incident. Throughout the other investigations, we measured actions fairly according to their compliance with laws, policies, procedures, and standing orders. And when we unfortunately found clear wrongdoing, we took disciplinary action against those individuals involved. First of all, I want to introduce to my right, Deputy Chief Romano. To his right, Public Chair Safety, Dean Sirlecki, and obviously, Sergeant Boba. Sergeant Boba.
Thanks, Chief. In front of you here is a timeline of events from February through April, which encompasses the investigations that the police department undertook in reference to different internal issues. I'm going to start with February 28th, where the Niles Police Department night shift responded to a local fast food restaurant on a well-being check. That well-being check involved a part-time, non-sworn civilian member of our police department. This ended up being a medical issue, which was handled as such and completed. Mr. Beyer became aware of this February 28th incident later that morning. Once he returned to work on March 1st, Mr. Beyer began his own investigation into the incident without the authorization of the chief of police or his orders. And part of this, Mr. Beyer went into the body camera server and copied footage from that onto his cell phone, his work cell phone. On March 21st, 2021, Mr. Beyer's shift was assigned to handle a DUI crash which had occurred. Part of that DUI crash involved injuries to the driver who was subsequently arrested for DUI. That driver was transported to Lutheran General Hospital, and while at the hospital staff changed him from his clothing into a hospital gown. During that process, hospital staff discovered a handgun in this gentleman's pocket. The nurse that was involved in changing this guy from his clothing into his hospital gown alerted hospital security of the found weapon, who then notified Mr. Markadis, who had been assigned to handle that DUI crash. This 321 incident involved not only the discovery of the handgun, which was discovered by hospital staff, but it also includes falsification of police reports, which were later uncovered. This then led to a call on March 23rd from the supervising nurse at Lutheran General Hospital, and she informed us at that time of what had happened, that her staff had located this handgun on someone that was brought in by the Niles Police Department. On the 24th of March, Deputy Chief Romano contacted Mr. Beyer and advised him that he wanted memos regarding the actions of everyone that was involved in that case, which included Mr. Beyer, Mr. Zero, Mr. Markadis, and Officer Montgomery. The 24th of March was the date that the internal investigation began into this incident. On the 29th of March, the same shift that was commanded by Mr. Beyer handled an aggravated battery and theft of services which occurred at King Spa. In this incident, Mr. Beyer did not follow typical and expected supervisory protocols in the way it was handled. As a result, On the 31st of March, Deputy Chief Romano asked Mr. Beyer to complete a memo about this incident. At that time, Mr. Beyer told Deputy Chief Romano that he had information about a cover-up and possible law violations from an earlier incident. Mr. Beyer was given the opportunity to meet with Deputy Chief Romano and Deputy Chief Penzi on April 2nd. At this April 2nd meeting, Mr. Beyer referred back to the February 28th incident as what he wanted to report as being a cover-up. So he had this information on the 1st of March, reference to February 28th incident, which he claimed was covered up by the police department and may have been violation of a law. But he held on to that information until a April 2nd meeting, which is obviously more than a month after the fact. During that meeting, Mr. Beyer was asked by Deputy Chief Penzi repeatedly to provide all of the information that he had referenced this February 28th incident. Mr. Beyer chose not to do that. Instead, he only chose to give parts of the information that he had referenced this incident, but not all of it. Eventually, because of his continued refusal, Deputy Chief Penzi ordered Mr. Beyer to provide all of the information that he had. Because Mr. Beyer chose not to, he was being insubordinate and was ultimately placed on administrative leave and sent home. We also, at this point, began an internal investigation into the allegations made by Mr. Beyer, referenced the February 28th incident. Once he was on administrative leave, Mr. Beyer made yet another complaint to Chief Tigera, alleging that he was the victim of threats that were made towards him by another civilian, non-sworn part-time employee of the police department. This investigation was not sustained, and at that point, we had concluded all of our investigations. The March 24th DUI incident was a sustained internal investigation. The King Spa incident was violations of protocol, and the April 5th threat was not sustained. Going all the way back to the 28th of February, this was also unfounded. That completes the timeline. Chief?
Thank you, Sergeant Boba. This situation is proof that we have an overall healthy culture and a system at the NPD where we will follow through and take a stand against inappropriate behavior in an objective, lawful, and unwavering manner, even though when it's tough, even when it forces us to take a long, hard look at ourselves, even when there are pressures from the outside. We will always make the right decision in accordance with the rule of law. So to recap, the allegations came to us of a cover-up on or about 3/31. Mr. Beyer knew about this on or about 228, went into our server and retrieved that information, which was unauthorized. He kept that information until he brought it to the attention of Deputy Chief Romano on 3/31. So the question is, why did he hold on to it? Once we knew about it, we acted. We opened up an investigation. We investigated it, and we saw that it was unfounded. As it relates to the DUI crash, in that situation, there were guns that were recovered, and there were falsification of reports. As it relates to the King Spa, internal protocols were violated. We are an accredited agency, Tier 1, through the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police. Again, we live by rules, policies, procedures, and standing orders. We are now applying for Tier 2 accreditation. At the end of the day, we have one officer that was disciplined for the event on 2/28. That's for insubordination, not following orders. The other 3 officers were disciplined and subsequently resigned. 2 resigned and 1 received a 5-day suspension. In closing, as indicated, the Niles Police Department will not tolerate any violations of policies, procedures, and the law by Niles police officers, nor any other inappropriate conduct. We will continue to be transparent and accountable to the public and work every day to make our village proud. Thank you, and I'll entertain a couple of questions.
Do you have the plans to release the report of the internal investigation, or will that be released?
That report or that incident has been referred to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for their review.
Will it be released at any time?
It's being reviewed by the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. I don't know when we could release it.
You also mentioned that there were falsification of reports during the DUI incident and protocols violated for the King's Spot incident. Can you provide more details? What was falsified and what protocols were violated?
Again, as it relates to the DUI crash, falsification of reports, that has been referred to the Cook County State's Attorney's Office for their review. As it relates to the King Spa, the protocols, you have to, during a situation like that, you have to notify the Detective Bureau as well as Senior Command, and that wasn't done. Mike, if you want to go into what he didn't do.
Sure. So the incident at King Spa was an aggravated battery and a theft of services. And typically, and as a procedure, when an aggravated battery, which is a crime that causes serious injury to someone, occurs, detectives are contacted by the on-duty supervisor, and then we would respond immediately to that and begin our follow-up immediately. We didn't have that opportunity in this situation because we were not notified as we should have been. The Detective Bureau.
The fact that the State Attorney's Office is looking into this, does that mean that there could be more disciplinary discipline or more resignations or terminations going forward?
Police initially did not release any information about the aggravated battery. There was a one-sentence line in the bulletin that said a man was pushed, and it was a very serious incident. I found out more information by contacting the business. Can you talk about why information was not immediately released on the seriousness of what had occurred there?
Well, as you could see through the timeline, we were working on 3, 4, 5 investigations. We had to peel the onion back on what we had and whether there were any criminal violations involved. So that was a decision why we didn't disseminate it at that point. We were going through everything, as you could see through the timeline.
But there was a serious injury and that was not released. The man was in the hospital, he was in ICU. That information was not released to the department. Is there a reason for that?
I've answered the question.
So there are a lot of protections under the State's Whistleblower Act. Can you say how confident you are in your investigation that any legal steps by Mr. Beyer would result in anything else going forward against the department?
As it relates to what Mr. Beyer's going to do, I can't answer that.
No, but like your part of it.
Okay, as it relates to the Whistleblower Act, he's describing himself as a whistleblower, and I would wait until everything is over at the State's Attorney's Office before I comment on that.
Nick Beyer said he wasn't interviewed as part of the internal investigation. Is that correct? And if so, can you talk about why he was not interviewed?
That's a very good question. So let's talk about that. He's had 3 opportunities to tell his side of the story. The first one was on 4/2 when he met with Deputy Chief Penzi and Romano. He neglected to give his side of the story, but invoked what he indicated his whistleblower right. On June 4th, he was ordered to come in for an interrogation based on the Howard Street call. He disobeyed the order and failed to appear. So that's a second opportunity to tell his side of the story. And then on July 6th, he had the opportunity to go in front of the Fire and Police Commission, which I believe he said it in a couple of outlets that he was looking forward to that hearing. He waived his right for a hearing and resigned. So he had an opportunity on 3 occasions to tell his side of the story. You have 2 more questions.
Regarding the DUI crash, you haven't released any information at all on that. No dispatch logs, no basic report, no anything. Is that going to be forthcoming at all? And I understand the Cook County investigation, but there isn't. With the February 28th incident, with the Kings Pond incident, there was information released. With the DUI crash, there hasn't been anything at all.
So to answer your question, is it going to be forthcoming? The answer is yes.
Can you say when?
No.
You talked about transparency for the public. We're just wondering if there's an opportunity for us to speak directly with a public information officer like we have in the past. Right now, we're just emailing and we're really not allowed to speak to anyone. It makes it a lot easier. All of the other departments have someone who is briefed in the major incidents. They know what's in the report. They can answer questions. Is that something that you can provide in the near future for us? Just going back.
I'll take that under advisement, but that's our protocol.
It's very difficult to get information from the department right now. On even, just incidents that are in the bulletin if I have additional questions on something.
Well, I believe that we have been giving you information. I believe that as it relates to this timeline, there were reasons why we were not providing information. I think you're probably relating to that. We weren't answering the FOIAs in accordance with ongoing investigations. But other than that, I believe that we have been giving you information when you do send us an email.
But we really prefer to actually speak to someone to get more information. I know there was a robbery at a pizza place, and it's just like I have to send questions and I get like 2-word answers. And sometimes that's not helpful. It's easier to talk to somebody who has all that background and can provide. I know that you can't sometimes provide all of the information, but at least we can ask that question directly. And that's what I do with other departments, and it works out well for us. And that's what we used to do with Sergeant County.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you very much.